Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Clarity 16.0.1 Supportability and Feature Training. My name is Dave Sprague. In this section, we are going to be covering the staffing updates delivered in this release. So let's get started. What's new? Well, we're introducing a new configurable visual resource staffing workspace. Essentially, we've got a new allocation timeline that displays resource allocations in a single screen using either allocations by investments or allocations by resources views, and total allocation versus availability using either resource availability and resources by role. It also includes support for configurable filtering and search, save views, widgets, as well as a configurable details flyout for those selected investments or resources. So the interesting thing here is we can see resources by investments or investments to resources, and then on the same screen we can see their availability and allocations. The second piece is the staff module for both project and custom investments has been updated with an allocate from estimate action. I might accidentally say AFE, so that means allocate from estimates. And that is configured via blueprint. Upon upgrade, both project and custom investment blueprints are seeded with that AFE action. That underlying job for update allocation from estimates has been modified to support projects and custom investments. Previously, this job only supported projects. So why is this important? So from that allocation timeline perspective, customers have been asking for visual tools to manage resources and investment allocations. And our goal is to drive adoption. So we are delivering that capability. The configurable columns with added visualization helps users quickly review allocations from multiple perspectives and drive decision making. Just a side note, the ability to edit allocations in the timeline view or the histogram view, especially the right-hand side of the page, is not editable in this initial release of the timeline. So the product team made a decision and believes delivering the allocation timeline, even with this limitation, will help drive adoption. And we hope that by using it, you'll get experience with it and also provide us additional feedback as to what areas you're looking for. And as an aside, just like a lot of capabilities, this workspace serves as a framework for further enhance the user experience and its capabilities over time. Lastly, the staff module allocate from estimates action. So in order to drive adoption, high priority customer requested capabilities are included in the modern UX, and this is one of them. So let's jump into what's changed. So here is the new configurable allocation timeline workspace. How do you get there? Well, you get there through the staffing workspace. Remember that was introduced several releases ago. And we've essentially put in a new workspace. You can see the staff grid that previously was the only content in this workspace is now separated into its own area. So that was first introduced in 15.9.3. Now, consider these two separate workspaces, even though you get to them through the same navigation menu on the left-hand side. Consider them separate. Each of them has their own independent filters, widgets, save view, and view option configurations. So just keep that in mind. The upper section is referred to as the timeline section, and it has pre-built views that display allocations by resource, kind of like the R to I in the staffing workspace. And then, of course, allocations by investments, which is similar to I to R, like we used to discuss or still discuss in the staffing workspace. The bottom half of the section is referred to the histogram, which shows availability by resource or role. So this has two pre-built views to display allocations and availability by resource or role. So if we think about looking at it from resources to investment perspective, we've highlighted Cheryl here. There's a way to identify, well, what is Cheryl working on? And you can see in the timeline view, there's the duration and the monthly, in this case, monthly allocations are showing for Cheryl's investments that she's been allocated to. And on the bottom section, there's a histogram that shows her total allocation and availability per period in the histogram. And you can see there's red and green and gray to indicate over, under, or even, and allocations. The red dot that's shown here is a visual cue that this user, in this case Cheryl, she's over allocated, regardless of for that period. And it looks like as you scroll to the right or scan to the right, she's over allocated for a number of periods. And the bottom section, the histogram with the red, in her case, it's red or green, but in her case, it's red to indicate over allocation conditions for the period. So as far as understanding what the nomenclature is it's total allocation. In this example, for the month of May, it's 193 hours. That's what we're looking at now. And total availability is for 118 hours for the period. So it's total allocation across multiple investments over her total availability for that period. And that's why we're in a red condition. Each section has independent filters and controls, so they're not shared. When you expose the column panel on the left-hand side, I'm exposing the column panel for the upper side, and it follows those attributes are sourced from investments, resource, and team objects. On the right-hand side, I'm actually collapsed the upper section a little bit. There's a drag bar that allows me to make more real estate for the upper lower section, depending on what you want to do. So I'm on the lower section on the right hand side, looking at that column panel, and it is sourcing its attributes from the resource object. That section is dedicated to resources. There's another area for choosing, well, which investments would you like to investigate? There is, of course, the pre-built all staffed investments option. And then the other entries in this pull down simply represent the individual investment types for which the user has access. Now, as far as I mentioned that the right-hand side are read-only sections, but they do respond to actions that you can take on the left-hand side. For example, there is from within an expand resource. In this example, I can right-click and delete an allocation. On the bottom, there's the ability to, if you're looking at it by role or by person, a resource that is, there's an ability to staff or perform allocations using a familiar drag and drop to move the resource or roles from the histogram section on the left-hand side all the way up to and drop them on an investment. So moving on, the staff module for both projects and custom investments has been updated to include an allocate from estimates action. When you select one or more entries, the checkboxes on the left-hand side, that is when in addition to edit and delete that have popped up in the past, now allocate from estimates is shown. Just from a flow perspective, if I look from left to right, I'm going to just compare my ETCs and my allocations. They're of course different. In the middle, I've done some work by checking which resources I wish to update, and then I simply select the Allocate from Estimates button, and on the right-hand side, the system performs that action and the ETC and allocation values are now synchronized. As I mentioned, this is a seeded action. It is on all project and custom investment types blueprints. It is there seeded, but it is not enabled by default. So the administrator will have to come in and enable it. And there are business rules. You can create business rules to suppress the allocation from estimates button if you wish. Now, I mentioned that the underlying job has been updated to support both projects and custom investment types. This is just a visual here on the left-hand side, drilling into Studio and looking at the job, and it gives us the investment types that you can choose from. There's business outcomes, value streams, suppliers, programs. It all represent custom investment types in addition to the project entries there too. And on the right-hand side is just, this is what it looked like before. It was project only focused. So just keep that in mind. All right, well, let's take a look at the demo. We'll start with the allocation timeline, and then we'll move on for a brief discussion on the allocate from estimates staff module action. All right, so let me come out of PowerPoint and come into our product. All right, so here I am in our new area. I've come in through the staffing module. Here's the staff grid, which was the previous area for staffing, enterprise staffing with its configurable grid. And here we have the allocation timeline, which is the new area. Just a quick tour. The upper side can be looked at from either allocation by resource or allocation by investment. I just happen to have it in resource for now. And then there's a timeline which represents all of the investments for which these individual resources are allocated to. Now I filtered this based on the resource manager, Rosie Miller. So essentially, these represent all the resources for which Rosie is responsible for. And the timeline represents their investments and their monthly allocations for each. Now, in this collapsed view, I don't have a view just yet of all their investments, but we'll get there. The bottom part, the right-hand side, shows allocations per monthly period. In this example, I could do weeks, months, quarters, etc. And it shows me quick visual cues, red and green for over allocation, green for under allocation, gray is even allocation, and the white background is basically no allocation. So I've got some real quick visuals to tell me where, as my team, I'm looking after my team, I'm Rosie Miller, what should I be focused on? And again, I filtered the bottom section as well. So these represent all the staff and their individual allocations and availability information. And again, I'm using hours. I could use FTE or days as well. And the bottom section lets me look at resource availability or in terms of role. So we'll take a look at that in a second. All right, so right away, if I kind of scroll here, I'm looking for Dana Lewis. I can see that Dana Lewis was just on here a second ago. Bear with me. Dana Lewis right here looks to be in trouble in these 4 months here during the year. So as far as the upper part, let's take a look at Dana Lewis and see the investments that she is allocated to. So I can see the two investments. I have I can control any number of columns that I want to bring in here, right? So you have a lot of flexibility there. And as I mentioned, the columns that you put in the top are independent from the columns that you can put in the bottom. And I've just selected columns and looked at the bottom. So let's go back to Dana Lewis. Yeah. So I'll expand Dana, and I can see that she's definitely over allocated right here And the red dot tells me the periods that she's over allocated for. I see the duration of these investments that she's allocated for. I see the monthly allocation information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove Dana from the this project. And I should see Dana's information down below change to reflect exactly, a more comfortable position for Dana. So here's Dana right here. And as you can see, her situation has changed. She's no longer over allocated in that particular area. However, I do want to put another engineer back on that project. That was the International Trade Show project. So I'm going to go investment by resource. And now I'm seeing, since I've filtered on Rosie Miller, all the investments for which Rosie Miller's people are allocated to. So I'm going to go look for this particular investment, and I can see the people that are allocated there, right? But what I want to do is bring back an engineer. So I'm going to do a role switch here, and I can see all the individuals that Rosie's responsible for by role. And so here's Peter, and it looks like Peter's got some availability. He's got nothing going on in this particular time frame. So I'm going to drag him up here and put him and allocate him to that project. So we now have an engineer replacement. And you can see the allocations immediately are updated down below here for Peter. He's in a good state. We can work a little bit later on kind of the January and October, but for the duration of this investment, we're set. So we've done a good job there. Okay, let's take a little bit, go one step further here and look at, I wanted to look at one other individual and basically look at the similar type of fix or problem, solve the problem, find a problem and fix the problem. So here's John McCarthy, right? So what is John McCarthy working on? I can check that out by going allocation by resource, and I'm going to look for John McCarthy right here. And I can see that there's several areas, several investments that John's allocated to. Again, I can see the duration of the investments, and he's over allocated on every single one of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove him from this guy here. That should free up some resource. And he's still over a little bit in the early days here, so I'm going to remove him. And so we basically got him back down to a comfort zone. I still have some more work to do to work on the latter part of the year. But that is essentially what I wanted to show you for this new allocation timeline with its kind of resource to investment view and its investment to resource view and the ability to analyze information down below in terms of resource or role, any number of filters, any number of avenues that you want to take to inspect different investments that you have access to, and perform the remediate any kind of over under allocation situation. Now, as I mentioned, the right hand side is yet to be editable. We are working on that. That is something we're certainly going to be iterating on over the next several releases. Okay, let's move on to the allocate from estimates feature. So I've landed on a staff plan in a project. As I mentioned, this new feature is available for both projects and custom investments. I'm going to go ahead and notice the total allocations here and total ETC columns are here. As you'd expect, the values are a little different, but we would like to synchronize those and perform an allocation from estimates. So you can see the allocate from estimate button has come up. Simply select that. There's a little bit of a processing job, and then off it goes to make the necessary adjustments. Very powerful, and quite simple. All right, that concludes the demonstration of both the new allocation timeline, which is really our visual staffing area, and the allocate from estimates job. And that concludes the staffing update section. I appreciate your time and energy, and I wish you a good day or evening. Thank you.